most times companies, like 90% of times, companies make offers that are lower than what they are willing to pay for the role. It is just how the business works because they expect that people are going to negotiate. And if they have a chance that they can pay you less, of course, they're going to take it. Yes, there are so many myths about negotiation, and I'd say the majority of people, they don't negotiate to kind of like their full potential. So a lot of people grew up with certain ideas about money, like you shouldn't ask for more, or, getting into six figures is already a lot and that should be enough, or you don't want to, make your employer like retaliate against you. Let's do it.
All right. So, hello and welcome everyone to whoever's listening to this particular podcast. I have with me today on my show Jordan Sale. She is working at Rora. Rora helps people who are STEM professionals and who want to negotiate for better compensation for their first jobs or any kind of jobs. And they have been really good at this. And I think they have been able to help STEM professionals get to much more than what they can imagine and what they have typical conceptions about just starting their first job. So it's nice to have you, Jordan, on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jay. I'm excited for the conversation.
So I'll let you, like, the reason I didn't want to give out a lot about what Rora and what you do is, like, I want to leave it up to you. Can you tell us a bit about like what Rora exactly does and how does it typically step in when you have a job offer in hand, and what is your role there?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been a negotiation coach for the past 5 years. My own experience with negotiation starts, at my very first full-time role out of school. And while I'm a pretty confident and extroverted person, I have always really struggled to advocate for myself in terms of my compensation. And I've always felt like I was, being greedy for asking, or it's something that I shouldn't do, or it just felt really uncomfortable. And so it was always really hard for me. But I was super lucky in that I had mentors and family members who kind of taught me how to do it, encouraged me to do it, and kind of like guided me through the process along the way. And Rora kind of grew out of that. The idea is that for most people, negotiation is really scary, really hard, especially if you're coming out of academia. The business world and the way compensation works is super different. The way we talk about compensation is really different. And so, for most people, it's something that you've never been taught before. You've been focusing on your research and your dissertation and all of that. And the like nuts and bolts of how to negotiate is just something that hasn't really come up. And so what we do at Rora is we're kind of your guide through the entire process. Our goal is to not only help you negotiate your compensation, really your employment more generally. So, what level are you coming in at? Is this a manager that you are excited to work for? Do you understand the scope that you're going to be working on? Is the location the right location for you? Are the hours flexible? Like, all of these pieces fall under the umbrella of negotiation. And we actually think that if you negotiate right, everything can improve, and your relationship with your manager and your relationship with the company is actually going to get better as a result of negotiating, not necessarily worse. And so we've been around for 5 years. We've worked with more than 1,000 professionals, and we've really found kind of STEM to be sort of like our niche space because of two reasons. One, STEM professionals have a lot of leverage and a lot of power in the market, particularly those who are coming out of, CS and statistics PhD programs, going into research scientist roles at big tech companies. Those are very in-demand kind of roles, and there are only roughly 1,700 CS PhD grads every year. And the demand for those roles is increasing. And so you have a lot of power because there's more demand than there is supply. But then on the flip side, like I mentioned, these are often people who've never had any experience negotiating a big tech salary, or if you've been doing research or coming out of like a postdoc or something, whatever you're going to be offered by NVIDIA or Google or DeepMind or whatever is going to be, 5 times more than what you were earning. And so it can be really hard to think like, wow, this is a lot of money. Should I actually negotiate? And so our specialty is kind of like working with these candidates, helping them understand the power that they have, and then helping them figure out how to respectfully and strategically advocate for themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to be honest, in my experience, like I have not known a lot of people who exactly know that negotiation is something like a very normal thing, or like it's not normalized. It's like only when the case like you feel that you have been lowballed by a big amount that people consider negotiating. And most of the times people just go with the flow of like what is the offer that I have. If it matches with my certain set of expectations, I just go along these lines. So can you tell us more about like what do you think, like because you have worked with so many people in the past and also currently, what makes a negotiation a good one? So like are there any versions of you would say don't do's in a negotiation versus like some things that you think most candidates fail at understanding that this is not the basics of a good negotiation?
Yes, there are so many myths about negotiation, and I'd say the majority of people not necessarily mess it up, but they don't negotiate to kind of like their full potential. So, a couple of examples, most people think that when they're negotiating, they have to talk to the recruiter directly. That's the person who called and gave them the offer. That's the person who keeps emailing and texting and calling them and checking in. But really, you're kind of leaving a lot on the table if you're not simultaneously talking to your hiring manager and potentially even their manager as well during the negotiation. So, just talking to the recruiter is like a huge missed opportunity because the recruiter isn't thinking about the company's business interests. Their job is to get you to sign as quickly as possible. And they may be a great
Mm,
person and they may like you and they may be friendly and all of that, but they don't have the power to change your level. They don't have the power to take your comp to above the compensation band. It's just not part of their job. They're not the one that's going to be responsible for your business outcomes once you get into the role. So it's really the hiring manager that can be most persuasive and advocate to the compensation committee for the highest possible compensation. Another example of this is, I recently worked with a client who has an offer from Bloomberg to do research there. And the recruiter was being pretty difficult about the timeline and saying, no, sorry, like we don't have any flexibility. We have other candidates in the pipeline. And so we had the candidate go and talk to their hiring manager. And, they were talking about the role and all of that. And then they said, at the end, like, hey, this is a big decision. This is my first job out of my PhD program. This is my first job not in academia. I am interviewing with some other companies, and I'd really love to be able to have all of the information before I make my decision. Would it be possible for me to get some more time to decide? And the hiring manager was like, absolutely. This is a huge decision. Like, how much longer do you need? Like 3 weeks, a month? What's best for you? So the
mm,
recruiter had said, no, no, no. But the hiring manager was like, yeah, no problem. And ultimately, what they decided was what goes. And so the person was able to get more time, was able to finish the rest of their process, and then able to make a more informed decision. And not to mention, the hiring manager won a lot of like approval. The candidate was like, wow, this hiring manager is awesome. They really have my back. I
yeah.
could see myself learning from them. I appreciated how supportive they were. So it was actually like good for Bloomberg that they give the person more time.
Yeah, I think there's this often this fear, right? Like if I try to, like in this case, that person negotiated basically some kind of extension of a deadline or something like that, because that's their priority over there. So I think, do you find also the same case with most of the candidates that you interact with? Is like there is a fear, right? Because if I try to nudge this in any direction, I might just end up losing this offer. Do you often find this the case? And for, like, I mean, I'm sure you must be finding this case, but like, what are the number of chances that you would say if I nudge or negotiate in some way, it can hamper my chances of this getting this offer? Is there any proof for that?
It's a great question. So I'd say, the number one thing that blocks people in a negotiation is their own fear. And so we often feel in our role that we're actually negotiating with our clients more than they are negotiating with the company, right?
Yeah.
Because there is so much fear, and it makes a lot of sense. One, this is new for a lot of people. They've never done it before. Two, a lot of people grew up with certain ideas about money, like you shouldn't ask for more, or, getting into six figures is already a lot and that should be enough, or you don't want to, make your employer like retaliate against you. And so, and then layer in like the current economy, there is a lot of fear out there of like, oh, well, there are a lot of people looking for jobs. So I'm sure if I push too hard, maybe they'll go with someone who's more affordable or something like that. So I totally get that fear. And we try to not tell people that their fear doesn't make sense. We just try to help them understand like, where does it come from? And are we getting any signals from the company that you're about to lose the offer? Or is this all like your own fear that you're bringing to the table? And, 9 out of 10 times it's all the candidate. It doesn't really have anything to do with the company. In terms of your question about offers being rescinded, in the 1,000 offers or negotiations I've helped do, I think I've seen 3 offers be rescinded. And usually there's like something else that's going on there, or the company showed like a bunch of red flags along the way. But I would say like I've never seen an offer rescinded from Google, and we do a ton of Google negotiations. I've never seen an offer rescinded from any of the big tech companies. Like the 3 that I've seen have all been startups, and are all usually the candidate looks back and is like, that just like wasn't a good company. Because one of the things that we really try to focus on and why we emphasize the hiring manager relationship is because we want this to be respectful. We don't want to like push too hard on the company. We want the company to feel like excited to give you more compensation. And so we focus a lot on having our clients talk to hiring managers about, what are your expectations for the role? What are the metrics I'm going to achieve? If I'm a star employee, like how am I acting? And like really try to get the managers excited about bringing this person on. We walk people through an exercise we call like the impact roadmap, which is where after you get the offer, you literally write down like, here's what I'm going to do in my first 6 months on the job. Obviously, you don't always have all the information, but then you take this document and you share it with your hiring manager and you say, hey, here's how I'm thinking about what to do, or here's how I'm thinking of approaching the role. What do you think? Am I focused on the right things? Are there other projects I should be thinking about here? What else can I be doing? And then usually after that, the hiring manager is like, oh my gosh, I need this person on my team. They get it. They're going to be like really easy for me to manage. They're going to be impactful. What do I need to do to close them?
And is this like the idea of writing this particular statement of actions or something that you will be doing in the next 6 months very common? Because most of the like, again, this comes from a very limited perspective or maybe limited understanding that I have had interacting with people. Is like most of the times like you get a job, you sign the papers, and you start at a certain date. Like is this idea of writing this immediate set of actions in the next 3 months, 6 months is like a very common thing that people do in research roles when they join any lab?
So it's not super common to do it at the offer stage. It is common in a lot of business roles. This happens that once you start a job, you put together what's called a 30, 60, 90-day plan. Like, here's what I'm going to do in my first month, my second month, my third month to get up and running. We've switched up the process a little bit, and we actually think it's beneficial to do it before you sign the offer so that you can show the company how awesome you're going to be. Also, so you can learn more, right? Like if you present your impact roadmap and your manager goes, this is stupid, this is all wrong, like you have no understanding of the role. Okay, well then how are they going to give you feedback once you actually start? How can you expect them to go advocate for you for a promotion? I mean, I'd say 99% of the time, the hiring managers we show the impact roadmap to are like excited and impressed. But I can think of one example where someone presented the impact roadmap to their manager and then came back to us and was like, wow, I don't want to work there anymore. I did not like that conversation. They gave me really bad feedback. They were really dismissive. Like, I'm really happy I showed that to them because I think that it would have been a really big mistake to join that company.
Yeah, but I mean, still, that's a win, right? Like the candidate was able to learn. Like it's not a perfect match. That's definitely it's definitely good negotiation in some other way. Like he or she was able to negotiate for a better place that works better for him. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in the very early days of negotiation coaching, we were really just focused on like how can we help people make more money, help them make a big ask. And then we would go back and like check in with those people, and some of them hated their jobs. And so now we're much more focused on, yes, compensation is important and we want to help you maximize it. But more than anything, we want you to feel confident that you're going into a role that is going to be a good fit where you can be
Yeah.
successful. And sometimes that means turning down an offer. Sometimes that means having like really open conversations before you join so you can get really clear and make it clear to them what you are excited to work on and you're not super excited to work on.
And one of the big questions that I think when before I was doing this podcast, I asked a lot of people who I knew that what kind of questions they would want to know from someone who is like a negotiation coach is, how can I know if I'm in a position to negotiate or not? Isn't like, because most of the candidate, like I do not have a fair understanding of the market value, right? Like I can just ask maybe two other people who started off with me or maybe 2 years earlier than me. So if the first question that someone asks you is like, how do I know if I'm in the right position to negotiate or not? What would you say to him or her?
Yeah, great question. And one that we definitely get a lot. So I would say, first of all, without knowing anything about the person, um, most times companies, like 90% of times, companies make offers that are lower than what they are willing to pay for the role. It is just how the business works and how companies are structured because they expect that people are going to negotiate. And if they have a chance that they can pay you less, of course, they're going to take it.
Mm,
Um, so without, being a stellar candidate, terrible candidate, all of that, the fact that you got a job offer from this company shows that they want to hire you and believe you bring something to the table. And so it's almost always worth negotiating. However, I think what you're asking about is your leverage and like, how do you know if you have a ton of leverage or how do you know if you have very little leverage? And so there's sort of like two buckets of it. Um, the first one is like the company's perspective. So do they have other candidates in the pipeline? Are those candidates at offer stage? What was your feedback like during the hiring process? Have you gotten amazing, stellar feedback, or did it take them a while to give you the offer? Did they give the offer to someone else first? They said no,
mm,
and then they came to give you the offer. You can ask these questions to your hiring manager, to your peers once you get the offer, and you can suss out the leverage you have. Similarly, like, has this typically been a hard role to fill? Has the company been trying to fill this role for 6 months? All of those kind of things can give you leverage. Is it a super niche role where your research that you did during your PhD, there's only 5 other people in the country that have done similar kind of research? So therefore your skill set is more in demand. I would say generally for these research scientist roles, like these are really hard positions for companies to fill, especially right now, because like I mentioned, the demand for these roles is so high that companies are just like in bidding wars with each other to fill them because every single company wants to develop competency in AI and machine learning. And some
yeah.
companies are ahead in the race and some companies are behind in the race. But there's just a ton of leverage there. So, and then lastly, like your hiring manager, if you do this impact roadmap with them, like really build up their support, that gives you more leverage to negotiate. It also reduces the risk that something's going to happen to your offer. So that's all on like the company side. And then there's your own personal leverage. So do you have multiple offers? Are you currently working and do you really like your job? If I love my job versus I hate my job, the way I'm going to negotiate for something new is going to be really, really different. Do you have a lot of time left in your PhD program where you could continue recruiting? Do you have an option to do another 6 months of research or take on a postdoc? All of those kinds of things make like a huge difference in what you're going to be confident asking for. And the external situation may be the same. Like you may only have one offer and you may be, an above average candidate, but not like the world's best candidate. But if you feel like you have time and if you want to hold out for the right offer and are confident in yourself, then you're going to negotiate a lot better than someone who doesn't think that they're going to get another offer.
Mm,
Right now in this market, it's pretty hard to line up multiple offers at the same time, just because recruiting timelines have changed a lot. A lot of companies have switched to like what they call just-in-time recruiting. They're recruiting a couple months before they want to fill the role, versus it used to be that Google would give you an offer 9 months before they want you to join, or something like that. And so because of that, we see a lot of people who just have one offer and they end up negotiating like wildly differently from each other, because some of them are like, yeah, if this one doesn't work out, like I'm not willing to settle and I will walk away from an offer that's low. Whereas someone else is like, no, like I need to finish, my program is ending. I can't stay another year. I'm really scared I'm not going to get any other offers. Like I want to negotiate, but I have to take this and I'd rather not risk losing it.
Yeah. And I think the most common ones that people would know is when you have multiple job offers, you can have a number you have in mind where you can say, I want this much amount because if the other company is willing to pay me this much, I feel my worth is at X value. But first, like my question is in a two-step process. Like, first of all, how do you negotiate when you just have one offer in hand? Because like, how do you play your cards that, okay, I can just maybe leverage my work experience or what I can bring to the table? We already discussed the statement like that you said, like 30, 60, 90. And my second fold of question is like, how do I make the first proposal that I just want like X plus 5 or X plus 10, whatever the initial offering was from that company?
Yeah. So I think there are two situations where people might only have one offer. One is they have one offer, but they're in the interview process with other companies, and another offer may come through, but they don't have time. Like, they have this company gave them 2 weeks, but they're still recruiting for Google, and
Yeah.
that's going to be an 8-week process. So what do? How do they navigate that? And then the other situation is someone just has one offer, they have no other interview processes, they're not really planning to interview at other places, they want to take the offer that they got, but they also want to negotiate. So in the first situation, what you really want to be negotiating for is more time, because it is easier to negotiate when you have multiple offers. And like, especially coming out of a PhD program, you deserve to get to see all of your options to each other, to have your pick. You did all of this research for 5+ years. Like, you get to have that time to decide. And 99% of times companies will give you that time to decide. Even if they say up front, you have 2 weeks to get back to us, you can always negotiate the deadline, unless the hiring manager literally says to you, sorry, we have another candidate in the pipeline. I want you to take this offer, but if you can't decide by like Monday, I'm going to give it to someone else. Unless you get something that's that specific and that direct, then you can always negotiate for more time. So that's like what we really focus on doing when someone has one offer but are in process with other companies. Then in the situation where someone has one offer, no other offers, and they're like super excited about the one offer they have, that's when we focus on like market data, value creation, and helping like basically convince the candidate that they are allowed to ask for more, that they are deserving of it, and that if a company is rude or dismissive or doesn't really work with them on the offer, that this isn't a place that they want to work. And sometimes that's not even like negotiating for more compensation. So sometimes, not often, but sometimes we see someone get an initial offer and it's just a really, really good initial offer. We don't think you should negotiate like just to negotiate, but in that case, we'll still have someone do the impact roadmap. We'll still have them think about all of the other components of the compensation, not just salary, not just
Yeah.
equity, but even like the scope, the title, the level, all of those things, and just make sure that they feel really good about all of that. Make sure that they feel really good about the hiring manager. And I'd say like, yeah, maybe 5% of the time the recommendation is not to negotiate, but most often companies make a low first offer and there's room to negotiate even if that's the only offer you have.
Yeah, and that's a very nice segue to one of the blog articles I think I read on Rora's website. Is there were like a list of things that even I learned that there are things that I can negotiate for which I didn't know. Like most of the most common ones that we have know is like the cash, the stock units, and the obvious like maybe leaves or something. But on the blog post, I think you guys mentioned there are like maybe I think more than 10 things that you can negotiate. There are like I think working in the long term aspect of your job. So can you tell more about like does it like how does one determine what factors I should be negotiating for? Because yes, on one hand, I just want everything to be more on all aspects, right? I want a higher severance package, I want a higher cash, I want a higher stock units, but definitely I cannot get when I'm negotiating everything at once. So how does one define, first of all, like what are the things that you think people miss, that most of the AI people who might not have idea about these things miss? And secondly, how do I decide which things I want to negotiate on?
Yeah, great question. So I'd say the first thing we always have people check on is the level of the role. Um, there are certain levels that are standard for PhDs to be put into out of school. But sometimes, like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15, 20% of the time, someone gets a lower level. Maybe it's due to, they had an interview that they just didn't quite knock out of the park. Maybe it's due to something going on in the market. But we've had a few situations where we see people coming out of PhD programs get lower level offers than they should. So, for example, like usually coming out of a PhD program into Google, you should be an L4. But we've seen people get offered L3 out of a program. Or Microsoft, I think you should be L64, but we've seen people get offered L63. And so that's like the first thing you want to kind of figure out is like, am I being leveled correctly for this role? And if you're not, that's the first thing you want to negotiate. You don't want to talk about money. You don't want to talk about start date. You want to make sure that you're being brought in at the right level, because if this is a company you're planning to stay at for 3, 4, 5 years, your pay is going to be like deprecated from the very beginning. And it's also really hard to like move up once you're in one of these companies. So I was just talking to a friend who out of his grad program ended up in an L3 role at Google instead of L4. And it's now been over 2.5 years and he's still at that level. He's done well. Maybe he hasn't like knocked it out of the park, but he's done really well. But because he started at such a low level, like his pay is still super low, his scope is still super small, and it's going to be impossible for him to like effectively catch up to his peers. Not to mention, like, it's not just about keeping up with other people, it's about feeling valued for the work you do. And the longer he stays as an L3, the less confident he feels, the less appreciated he feels, the less excited he feels to kind of stay at Google long term. So level is like the first thing. And if you realize that you've been brought, like you're being offered all at the wrong level, you want to ask to interview for a higher level. And that's a conversation you want to have specifically with your hiring manager. You don't want to say like, can I be at a higher level? You want to offer to interview, and then you want to prep really hard for those interviews. So, I have examples of people who have had to do 2, 3, 4, 5 more interviews. But then at the end of that, they're like, okay, yep, you're right. We think you can do an L4 role. Immediately, your pay increases really substantially. Like it could be 25, 30% just from jumping up a level. Not to mention, you feel like a lot more excited to join and confident that you're going to be able to like have a substantial scope and work projects to work on. So that's kind of like the first piece. Then the second piece is kind of hiring manager relationship. What is like the work you're going to be doing? Are you excited about that? Do you understand what it takes to be successful? Then the next piece of that is compensation. And it's not just base salary, but it's base salary, it's equity, it's annual bonus, it's signing bonus, relocation. Those are kind of like the big main ones. And then after that, it's start date and, any other things that would kind of like impact what your life is going to be like there, but not be kind of like the first round of things you want to think about.
Yeah, yeah. And what are the best ways that people can figure out if they are lowball? Like, is this the only way to figure that out would be to check sources like levels.fyi or ai.paygrades or any other website that I might be missing? Or are there any other ways also to figure this out?
Yeah, so AI pay grades is awesome. We actually like supply them with all of their data so that they can publish it. So I think that's like the best source for researcher roles. I also think talking to your peers can be really helpful, not just to understand what they're being paid, but also even to understand like what it's like to negotiate with that company. For example, like one of our clients, like one of his friends just got an offer at a company he just got an offer from, and his friend was like, oh, by the way, like I was able to negotiate a 20% increase, and now that really helps increase the confidence of the person we're working with to know that they're going to be able to do that. um, so I think that's kind of one piece of it as well. But then the like other thing I would say is I see that candidates tend to like over rely on data. And yes, data is
Mm.
important. We want to use it to help candidates increase their confidence, but you can still negotiate without having a lot of data. If you are super in demand for a role, if you have a higher offer elsewhere, if you are just like not that excited about a company and willing to walk away unless the offer is a lot more competitive. So I can give an example of this. Like we had a client who was finishing up a PhD program in Europe. All of their family was in Europe, and they got an offer from Meta in the Bay Area. It was a really competitive offer and it was really high, but they had other offers that were based in Europe, and they weren't like that excited about moving halfway across the world. And so they basically told Meta, I'm not going to be able to take this unless this is like super, super exciting compensation, because it's just too far for me to go to just be making like a little bit more than what I could make if I took my offer from DeepMind or Google or whatever the European companies were. And so Meta just ended up raising the offer a ton. And it wasn't that the person had a higher offer from somewhere else or anything like that. It was just that they were willing to walk away. And so Meta really wanted this person and worked really hard to make the offer more compelling.
Yeah. And one of the, like, I would be curious to know any examples that you have. Like, let's say you make a counter argument, counter proposal to the company for like an increase or a better compensation. But let's say if they politely disagree to that particular scenario, do you have any candidates who still take up that job, or is it like a bad reputation? Does it give you a bad reputation when you join the company because you asked for something more and then that's not feasible for the company for any whatsoever reasons? Is it still fine to take up the offer that I still have at the table?
Yes, definitely. And I'd say we see people sign with companies where, let's say they offer you 100, you ask for 150 and they come back with 120. Like we see people take those kind of offers, all the time. I'd say the bigger thing is if the company says a flat out no, did they give you a good reason why? And do you still feel like you would be valued and supported if you went there?
Hmm.
So, for example, I can think of one negotiation that this person was like a very senior engineer, and she did a negotiation with an early stage startup, and they gave her a really good offer to begin with, but she was working at a company and she was fine with her job and she didn't really want to leave that badly, and so she negotiated pretty hard, and ultimately the company gave her a little bit of an increase, but not much. But the CEO worked with her so much, like had so many conversations with her, really explained how they thought about their compensation philosophy, like why they gave her the offer they gave her, how they were going to support her in the role, that even though she didn't get that much more, she felt really valued and supported by the company, and she was really excited to join. I've also seen companies where they say no, but it's in like a really rude and dismissive way. And in that case, I'd say like that's a flag. This is a
Yeah.
company where it's probably going to be hard to be successful. So it does depend a little bit on kind of like what's said and how the company communicates it. And do they give you like good reasons why they gave you what they gave you?
Yeah. I think it's more like coming to the middle grounds, like understanding what middle grounds are acceptable to both of them. And it could be, like you said, in this particular scenario, if the other person realizes what exactly the company is offering, and maybe making her or him understand that the offering is up to his or her level. So I think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we try to frame negotiations as like a win-win, and
Yeah.
really trying to build like a stronger alliance with the company. The money is just like sort of secondary to that. But we really want to get away from this idea of like people thinking like, oh, like if I get more from the company, they lose, or if they don't budge on the negotiation, I lose. Like we want to really find the common ground and make it seem like a win-win. And so we also talk a lot about this idea of like give and take, That's why we have people do the impact roadmap. That's why we have people offer to interview for the higher level. It's not just demanding more, it's saying, hey, I'm willing to work for it. I'm going to show you what I plan to do in the role, or I'm willing to interview for the higher level. Like, I'm willing to work with you in exchange for the higher compensation.
Yeah. And one of the other questions that I also have is like, at what stage in the whole cycle this negotiation part can come in? Because and feel free to take this as a anecdote or any kind of case scenario that you want to take in, and if it is open for you to disclose any of the details, is like what exactly for, because a lot of people listening to this particular podcast, like most of them are researchers, but they are also like young researchers, so they might not have the experience of even applying or interviewing for a few of the companies. That would be like, it would be like the first time interviewing in the fall 2023 semester or something. So can you walk us through an example of what an interview process looks like? You can treat the interview as a black box. Like once you have a successful interview, what happens? Like when does the negotiation part come in before my first date of joining?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to kind of be mindful of is that the company might try to have a conversation about compensation with you before you even have an offer, maybe even before you've done like a technical interview. Sometimes the recruiters in the initial kind of phone screen will ask you about your compensation expectations. And so you really want to be prepared for that and say as little as possible. Say something like, look, I'm just starting to interview. I'm still getting a sense of market rates, so I'm not able to say a number right now. But if you have a number
Yeah.
you're targeting or a range you're targeting, I'd love to hear it. Or you can say like, look, this is going to be my first time working in big tech. Like market data is still new for me. I'm used to academia, so I'm not comfortable saying a number, but would love to hear what you're thinking. You basically just want to like punt it as much as possible. I mean, the best thing you can do for your negotiation is to do really, really well in your interviews.
Yeah.
Compensation committees, when they put together someone's offer, like say at Google or something like that, they were looking at the feedback you got throughout the interview process to determine where in their compensation band for an L4 should they place you. So the better you do during the interviews, the more that's going to be reflected in your compensation. And then when you try to negotiate and the recruiter and the hiring manager go to the compensation committee and say, hey, can we do a higher offer for this person? They're going to again look at the feedback you got to say, okay, yeah, this person's a star. Let's increase the offer. Um, so that's sort of like the second piece to be mindful of. And then the third piece to be mindful of is what happens when you get the offer itself. So usually recruiters will use that phone call to try to get as much information from you as possible. They'll want to know, are you interviewing with other companies? Do you have other offers? How do those offers look? How does our offer compare? What do you think about our offer? Like press you for information. They'll also try to get you to agree to a timeline. Hey, can you let us know by next Tuesday? Things like that. And so you want to be prepared for those conversations and say as little as possible and not agree to a timeline, not give any comments on numbers, and be thoughtful about like what you share about other companies. Like, let's say you get an offer from Google, but you also have an offer from, you know, Allen AI, like a research institution or something. If Google is like, so like, do you have other offers? You're like, yeah, I have one from Allen AI. They immediately know that Allen AI is never going to be able to offer what Google can. And so the initial offer they give you might actually be lower than if you hadn't said, I have an
Yeah.
offer from Allen AI.
I see. Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. I've never thought in that way. I think because the recruiters can actually make use of this information that we share to make sure that they can lowball. I mean, it makes sense from their perspective, but like we have to be just aware of these kind of scenarios. And would you say so? As in this kind of verbal offer, let's say I'm ignorant to what are the trends in the market, and if I say a number, they'll try to match it. Like, do I still like, if like, can I go back and forth after these particular verbal offers that are made, and how do I go about it? Like, as in, like, I'll just email them up saying, oh, this is the thing that you made, but I did some homework and I think this is not my worth. Is that the normal route, or is this like a bad practice?
Yeah. So generally, your negotiation depends on kind of a few things. Um, We typically, so like once someone gets an offer from a company, we typically recommend that, ask the company to email you the details of the offer. If they say, oh no, sorry, we can't put it in writing, you can write them and say, hey, thanks for your time today. Here's what I heard about the offer. Can you confirm, like, yes or no? So that way you have the details in writing. Then
Mm.
you want to like walk away for at least 24 or 48 hours. Like, just take your mind off the offers, because we tend to get really, really emotional when money is discussed. We're either like really excited if it's higher than what we thought, or we're angry and we're hurt if it's lower than what we thought. And so you just kind of want to like walk away from it and give yourself some time to kind of settle down. Then you generally want to start what we call like the research leverage process. So this has nothing to do with the numbers. This is just interviewing the company, because you just spent, a month or 6 weeks or whatever interviewing with them. Now it's your turn to ask questions to kind of figure out if this is a place you can be successful, and also to determine how much leverage you have. So what has been the recruiting process for this role? Has it been a hard role to fill? Do you have other candidates in the pipeline? Can you share the feedback I received during the process? All of these
Yeah.
things to kind of help you kind of figure out what kind of leverage you have. You also want to talk about like priorities and metrics and what it means to be successful. And then the next step is like the impact roadmap conversation, where you're saying, here's what I'm planning to accomplish. How does this sound? What am I missing? And then at the end of that conversation, you can say to the hiring manager, like, hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm really excited about the role, but sort of the missing piece for me is still compensation. I'm planning to talk it over with the recruiter, but I was wondering if you'd be open to like advocating for me. And you can learn a lot based on if the hiring manager is like, yes, definitely make an ask. Yeah, I'll definitely support you, but like it's kind of out of my hands. Or no, sorry, this is like the highest we can go. Like that's very telling for you. And they are likely telling the truth more than a recruiter would. Then we always try to recommend that you take your updated impact roadmap and you go to your manager's manager and you go over it with them and you talk about it with them, and then you ask them for support as well. And then you go back to the recruiter and you make your ask. And so at that point, yes, you might, like, it sort of depends. Do you have other offers? Are you sharing those? Are you just saying what your ask would be? Either way, you've built up a lot of like social capital, as we call it, and can use that to your advantage. I think for people who do have multiple offers, there's a temptation of like, okay, let me take my highest offer and let me go tell these other companies about my highest offer. Actually, we recommend doing the opposite. Negotiate your highest offer first, do the impact roadmap, build social capital, get that offer up, and then take that offer to the other companies.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think, yeah, that actually makes more sense, because most of the people, they would be using that high offers. And I think most of the scenarios, I would be interested in some other company that is lowballing me, and I'm just gonna be using that particular high offer. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. If you use the highest offer first, then that just becomes your ceiling.
Yeah. And how would you say this, like this translates to the idea? Because a lot of people would be also interested to learn about the raises while they are working in a company, right? So this is not my first role that I'm getting out of my university, but I'm maybe just transitioning. And this also relates to the idea of like talking to your manager, doing your annual or performance reviews, and then asking for a raise. That is also, like you said, like dependent on my things that I'm bringing to the table. Like how do you think people make mistakes in these scenarios that are like the biggest flags that you just, because I've heard like so many scenarios where people don't get promoted, like they might get just some kind of bonus, but they still remain in the same position, like basically level wise. So how would you recommend someone who is planning to promote, he or she thinks that I'm due for a promotion and also a price hike, how can they get started?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I heard a lot of similar stories where people just kind of get stuck at the level. So I'd say there's a few things. One is you want to start early. You don't want to wait to hear, oh, you're doing a great job. Here's some areas you can improve on. We're going to give you a 5% raise. You don't want to ask for a promotion then. You want to be working to that conversation like 6 months in advance and start talking with your manager then about like, how am I tracking towards a promotion? What feedback do you have for me? Is there anything I can do to kind of ensure that I will get a promotion 6 months from now? what are the gaps that I need to kind of close between my level and the next level. So you want to start early. Um, Second of all, like it's not enough to just do a good job. You have to also make sure your manager knows you're doing a good job and make sure you're doing a good job on the right, most important projects. So
Yeah.
I'd say like one of the keys to being successful in most companies is actually figuring out what projects you shouldn't be working on and trying to get yourself on the projects that are the most important. It's kind of similar advice for how to navigate like the current climate of all of these layoffs is, how do you figure out what's important to the company at the highest levels and who are the people that are kind of most important, and how do you align yourself with them and the projects that they're working on and not get bogged down with like, the 40% of work that companies do that isn't actually like, mission critical.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say a few other things. I wrote down some notes on this. You also want to ask for feedback regularly. Like, don't wait to receive feedback. Ask for it and actually like review yourself and share the feedback you have, like your self review as
Yeah.
well. Because if you start doing that early, then you will learn about like all of the things you need to do to get promoted instead of like waiting to hear after the fact that you didn't do kind of the right things or not doing enough work or senior enough work or whatever it is. And then the last thing I would say is like keep track of like your accomplishments as you achieve them and the feedback you receive as you get it, and like keep a running list of that. So if you're at one of these big companies, if you have to do one of your like official self reviews or put together like a promotion packet or something like that, you have lots of information to look back on instead of trying to remember like, like what did I do last year that was good?
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I was just gonna pull that excerpt as in like the idea of, because in the recent scenarios, the job market is very finicky, right? Like it's like there is a fear that even if just having a job is better than like asking for a raise. And in this scenario, in this scenarios, I think what you said makes sense. Like trying to understand what are the project demands and where I can play and contribute more. But in the case of, let's say, if I'm not able to figure that out, do you think that's just a pointer for doing a better homework? Or would you say like there would be certain limits that where you cannot negotiate? There would be certainly scenarios where you can just advise someone saying that, oh, you are not in a good position as of now in the market and in your current position of whatever your performance level is, there you cannot negotiate, or there is always some room for pushing your boundaries.
I mean, my personal view, probably because the field that I'm in, I think there's probably always some room, but we try to be really smart about how we negotiate. And we try to not just like negotiate for the sake of negotiation. We negotiate for, getting more clarity on scope, making sure you're joining and you feel like supported as you're coming into the role, making sure that you feel valued by the compensation you're being given. We try to not just like ask for more just because like we can ask for more. I will say, like, I don't want to just pretend like the downturn in the market isn't happening. Like, it is a tougher market. And I think the way we see that play out is that it's harder to get multiple offers at the same time. And companies are giving like initial lower offers, but we are still seeing like really significant increases. Like, for example, this past month, we've seen 9 negotiations wrap up so far. And of those, 7 were able to increase their pay. And of those 7 that were able to increase their pay, the average increase was $60,000 a year. So like there still is a lot of room. Maybe last year the ratio would have been like 8 out of 9 people. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit harder to negotiate right now. But I think the biggest thing is like you have to negotiate a little bit like smarter because you may not have multiple job offers to use.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and just to, I think, summarize this one, like what kind of advice would you give? Like, I mean, we talked, I think, a lot of things. You covered a lot of topics that most of the things people get it wrong versus right, and what are the things most of the people, I would say, miss. Because to be honest, like when I was reading through all the blog articles, I got a chance to read through almost all the blog articles that Rora has published, and most of the things, like to be honest, I didn't know. And to be honest, like if I had the offers in hand, I wouldn't have cared, or maybe like I wouldn't have the time to read about these things unless I joined these offers. So if you were to advise to someone who is currently having job offers or who is about to have a job offer, what kind of one liner advice would you give to them in terms of negotiation? Like what are the key things you would summarize and say, look for these things, and if these are the things that you are noticing, it's a potential flag for that there's a scope for negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, I think my number one piece of advice is well, I guess I'd say like there's three things that that companies really do that kind of like hurt candidates or make the process worse. And I think they are urgency, desperation, and exhaustion. So urgency, companies saying, we need to know by next week, we need to know by next week, we need to know by next week. And finally you're just like, but I don't care. I want this recruiter to stop calling me. Like, I'll cave, I'll sign, whatever. Second is desperation, which is like feeling like, oh my gosh, if I don't take this offer, I'll never get another offer. It's such a hard job market. I will never get a job. Like, look, sometimes there is some like true scarcity, and we always really
Yeah.
try to understand for someone like, do you have to take this first offer you get? Let's talk about it. If you turn down this offer, or if the company takes the offer away, what will you do? I know that's really scary, but like by having people name it, a lot of times people realize like, okay, I'd be like really disappointed, but I'd be fine. I'm doing research. I have, three other companies I'm interviewing with. I would be fine. So we
Yeah.
like have people understand, is this like desperation or true scarcity, or is this kind of like perceived scarcity? And then the last one is exhaustion. Like, this is a hard process. You've just finished interviewing some of these companies. Their interview processes are super intense. You are often finishing up your PhD program, trying to present your dissertation, all of that. Like, there's a lot of things going on, and people are just like, I'm ready to be done. And so that is something that like really commonly gets in the way as well. And with the exception of like the urgency one, those other two, like those all come from ourselves. Companies have nothing to do with those. They just like play off of them.
Yeah.
But so I think like the overarching thing is like we get in our own way of negotiating. Companies don't make it easy by any means, but if you are confident in yourself, if you know like you're going to be great and you're really excited to advocate for yourself and try to view this as a chance to like learn about a company, and if it's going to be a great fit for you, the negotiation is going to go so much better.
Yeah, yeah, I love this, and I think, like, I mean, there are these are some fantastic points, and I think people who are listening to this podcast or watching this one, it's going to be really helpful. Because if I were to have like three takeaways specific to me from this conversation, is like the first is like to understanding the assumption that most of the offers that companies make you for the first time is already like a 90% tone down to your real worth, right? Because at the end they are trying to maximize their profit for this one. So understanding this assumption is like a big step for most of the tech professionals, or like most of the engineers that I've known around. And I think it could be specific to any job roles, but having this assumption in your mind is the key. And secondly, understanding like pitching your worth, right? So like you have done hard job making your expertise look good, you have been hired, so it's definitely like the company is not going to make extra efforts interviewing another candidate, because it's a hassle from their end too, to have these interviews being taken care of and processing through the pipeline. So understanding this leverage that you inherently have, that you have the offer, you have the chance that you can do something more than and just proving worth, is like a very important skill. And the third thing is like removing the fear, because I mean, even as I say this, I think there's always this slight portion in me that if I do this, what if my offer is like affected? But I think it's just like what you said, like it's a superficial thing in our head that we just feel that we cannot do that. So I think removing that fear would be the most important one. But yeah, I'll leave it up to open. Like this is just like an open ground. I mean, let me know if I missed something. But I think it's very important what you mentioned, all these points, and hopefully whoever's listening to this podcast finds it useful. So
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you so much for having me. I mean, I obviously love talking about this stuff and do it all day, every day, but your questions are great. And it's really fun talking and specifically about, people who are coming out of school, like how to
yeah.
navigate the tech market, because it's just really different and really overwhelming if you've never done it before.
Yeah, definitely. It's a chaos. At least in tech market, I would say it's like a lot of things are going on, new roles opening up and new definitions. Like I think the whole idea of like even research scientists, right? Like I was at Amazon last year and I just got a chance to look at their Slack channels where they post out salary compensations just for like my understanding. Like if 2 years down the line, if I went to Amazon for the same roles, and I just saw like so much variation. So when I talked to people, like people who I was working with, they were also research scientists versus what I saw on the Slack channels that they had like specific for Amazon, and versus when I go to Glassdoor or any other communities, it's like a very different gap. And like if it's like a very small margin, you feel that's okay, but like when you see a big margin, you definitely understand the idea of these negotiations. So yeah, it adds a lot of value. But
I also
yeah,
think kind of like to that, people really, really rely on market data, but we don't know like any of the story behind that data, right? Like you hear that your friend is earning the same amount that you were offered. You don't know like if they negotiated, you don't know if they had poor interview feedback. You don't know, you know, all of like the details behind it. And similarly, I think a lot of times people assume that like they are average, but you
yeah,
don't know unless the company tells you that, right? And so what I generally try to remind people of is like, let's make the companies tell us no. Let's not
yeah.
like assume that it's not possible. Like whether it's about asking for more money, asking to talk with your hiring manager again, asking for a deadline extension, so many times people, I don't think they're going to go for it. Let's just ask them. Let's give them a chance to say no. If they say no, fine, we'll adjust. But like, 75% of the time they say yes or are willing to work with you on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, I'll be just leaving a link to all the Rora blogs that I think we covered in this one. And I'll also leave a link to your profile so that like if people have any specific questions in general for negotiation, and if they want to pursue Rora services, they can directly reach out to you. But I think it's fantastic. I love what you guys are doing because it adds to the value, and it's a very small thing in terms of like what goes into engineer's head, but it adds value in the long term. So it's very good. So
Thank
thanks
you.
a
I
lot for
appreciate
sharing all
that.
these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited to help you negotiate your offer when you finish up.
Yeah, I think hopefully I finish up soon. So I think I'll be in touch with you on a different matter in that case. But yeah, I'll be happy to be in the industry soon. So yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks
Cool.
a lot for being here and sharing these insights.
Yeah, thank you.